Hello and welcome to yet another tutorial by Davies Media Design. My name is Michael Davies, and in today's tutorial I'll be going over 10 features that can be found in both Photoshop and GIMP. And the goal of this tutorial is to show you guys that GIMP, although it is a free program, can perform a lot of the same functions and features as Photoshop can, and can do it at the same level of quality that Photoshop can in most cases. But before we get into that, of course I want to direct you guys over to my website at daviesmediadesign.com. We've got tons of GIMP video and text tutorials on here, as well as Project Translate, some featured GIMP playlists, and our Pull of the Week results. You can also enroll in our GIMP photo editing course from beginner to pro photo retoucher, and I'll include a link to this as well as all the relevant links from this tutorial in the description of the video. So GIMP, of course, can be downloaded for free at gimp.org, and you'll see the download button right here for those of you who have not downloaded GIMP yet. And I'm going to be featuring a lot of photos today from Pixabay, so this is a free stock website, and a lot of my photos come from Sachin Tipchai, and I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, but this is a photographer from Thailand, and I really like his work, so definitely check that out if you have a moment. The first feature we're going to highlight is the canvas rotation tool. So imagine you're an artist and you're drawing on a piece of paper, and usually when you're drawing you can fluidly just turn the paper as you draw, and that just makes it easier for you to draw on your composition. Well, you can do that in Photoshop and GIMP, and in Photoshop you hit the R key on your keyboard and you'll see down here that this selects the rotate view tool. And so the rotate view tool is just the terminology used for describing the canvas rotation tool. So if I click on this canvas now, you'll see a little compass pops up and it's pointing north with that red arrow. That's just telling you where the original top of the image is. And now I can rotate this image, and I'm not actually rotating the image, so when I export this, it's not going to be exported at a rotated angle like this. This is just so if I'm doing something like painting with the paintbrush in here, I can just rotate this and it makes it easier for me to paint on here. So for instance, I'll grab a paintbrush here and let's say I'm just painting on this horizon for whatever reason, and I can hit R and just turn this a little bit, and now I can continue painting. And obviously this is a sloppy paint job here, but I think you guys get the point. So I'll hit R again to grab my canvas rotation tool, and I'll just rotate this again. And something that both programs allow you to do is reset the view. So let's say you've rotated this and now you want to just bring this back to the original. I can just hit this reset view button, and now this rotates back to the original rotation, or 0 degrees. Now if I come over here to GIMP, I can perform the same function, but instead of hitting the R key, I'll hit the Shift key on my keyboard and then click the middle button on my mouse. And now I can just move my mouse around to rotate this image just like I could do in Photoshop. And then I can also reset this view by going to View, Flip and Rotate, and then click on Reset, Flip and Rotate, and that'll bring it back to 0 degrees. Both programs allow you to constrict the canvas rotation to 15-degree increments. So in GIMP I hold Shift, middle mouse button, and then I hold the Alt key, and now I can rotate this by 15-degree increments. And again, I can come over here, View, Flip and Rotate, and then reset this. So the next feature that's found in both programs is the Straighten Layer feature, as it's known in Photoshop. So I'll come over here to my eyedropper tool and I'll click and hold that down. And right here you'll see something called the ruler tool. And now with this, let's say I want to straighten the horizon of our photo here. So I purposely made this horizon crooked before the tutorial. So now I want to just straighten out this horizon. What I can do is I can click and drag my ruler parallel to this horizon line here. And I can always adjust the points here if I need to raise these higher or lower. And basically what I'm telling the program is that I want to straighten out this ruler I just drew so it's a straight line instead of a crooked line like it is right now. So all I have to do in Photoshop is come up here to Straighten Layer, and now that's going to straighten out my image. And I can then grab the crop tool if I want and just go ahead and crop out all the transparent parts of this image. And then just click to crop. And so now we have a straightened horizon. Well, if I come over here to GIMP, I can do the same thing, except instead of using the ruler tool, we're going to use the measure tool right here in our toolbox. And similarly to Photoshop, all I have to do is click on the horizon here and just drag our measure tool, and I'm dragging it along the horizon. The main difference between Photoshop and GIMP is that GIMP is going to show you the angle of difference between a straight line and the line you drew. So here's that angle right here. So that's something to me that I think is actually pretty useful, because you can see how far off that horizon line is. And then you can come over here, and instead of being called Straighten Layer, it's just called Straighten, and it's under the Measure Tool options here. These are the tool options. And I'll go ahead and click that Straighten button, and that'll straighten our image out. And then again, I can grab the crop tool and just crop out the transparencies here, the parts of the image that just spill over, and then just click inside there and that'll go ahead and crop our image. I'll come back over to Photoshop. The next feature I want to highlight is the free transform tool. So I'm going to come over here to another picture and just get off my crop tool. So I just hit the move tool here. So in Photoshop, you can use something called the free transform tool, and that allows you to perform multiple transformations on the image using a single tool. So I'm going to come over here and unlock my main image layer, and I'll go to Edit, Free Transform, and you'll see this puts up a pretty plain looking tool here. But basically you can come over here and click on the corner, and that allows you to scale. If you hold Shift, it'll scale it proportionately. If you hold the Control key, you can actually click on these same nodes here, and that will change the perspective. I called it a node. It's actually called a handle. So if I click on these handles, you can see I can change the perspective of my image. If I click just outside of the handle, you can see I can rotate it. And then if I hold Control and click on one of these middle handles here, we can actually shear the image. So these outside handles will allow you to change the perspective, and these middle handles will allow you to shear the image. And then when you're done, you can just grab another tool. It'll ask if you want to apply the transformation, and you can go ahead and hit apply. And so there we've performed multiple transformations with our image using a single tool. Coming over to GIMP now, I'm going to grab the same image here, and in GIMP, instead of it being called the free transform tool, it's just called the unified transform tool. So you can click on this or go to Shift T. That's the shortcut key for this. And I'll click on my layer here, and now you'll see we have handles in here as well. The difference between GIMP and Photoshop is that Photoshop just kind of has simple square handles, whereas GIMP has different types of handles depending on which tool you want to use. And by the way, you'll notice my image became slightly transparent, and that's because I have the image opacity here set to 70. I can turn that all the way up if I want to. So here's all the controls for our unified transform tool in GIMP. But in my opinion, I actually like the handles better in GIMP because when you hover over them, it shows you what tool you're about to use, and the fact that they're different shapes. Like in this case, you've got a square for the scale tool, a diamond for the perspective tool, and then you've got an opaque handle here for the shear tool. So each handle is different, and then hovering over the handle shows you the mouse pointer for the tool you're about to use, the transform tool. So go ahead and drag over the square and drag it down so you can see we're scaling it down. If I hold Shift, it'll scale it down proportionately. And then right here, again, you've got the shear tool. And then if I click on the diamond shape here, we could change the perspective. So you can perform all the same transformations. And if you click in the middle of the image, it'll perform the move tool here. And then you can hit transform when you're ready to transform it. And there we have applied multiple transformations to our image using a single tool, just like in Photoshop. So I'm going to come back over to Photoshop. And the fourth feature I want to highlight is the quick mask tool. And to do that, I'm going to come over here to this picture of this girl with blue hair. And so the quick mask tool in Photoshop can be accessed via the shortcut key Q, or by coming over here and clicking on this icon. And you'll see that our foreground and background colors will automatically change to black and white. And then I can come over here and grab my paintbrush tool. And if I increase the size of my brush, I can go ahead and paint over this entire image. And you'll see that instead of painting black, it's actually painting red. And that is the part of the layer mask, basically, that is completely transparent. And then I can hit X on my keyboard to switch over to white, and then decrease the size of my brush here with the brackets on my keyboard, and go ahead and just paint over the area that I want exposed. So in this case, I want it to be the hair. And I'm just doing kind of a sloppy job here to show you guys this feature real quick. And I can always switch back over hitting X on my keyboard to black and just paint any parts out that I don't want in here. And then I can go ahead and hit Q on my keyboard, and that's going to reveal a selection area. So you could do a lot with this selection area. You could just fill it in right away with a color, or you can create a layer mask out of it, and that's what we're going to do. So I'm actually going to come over here, right click and duplicate our main layer. And I'll just name this hair color and click OK. And then I'm going to go ahead and click to apply a layer mask. And if I hide our main layer, you can see this is the area that has now been masked out using the quick mask tool. If I hold Alt and hit to create a layer mask, it's going to invert the layer mask. So everything we painted white is actually going to show up as black on the layer mask. And so everything besides the hair is going to be revealed. But I'm going to keep this the same way. I don't want to invert it. And I am going to switch my color back over to white, and still using my paintbrush tool, I'm just going to kind of paint in the gaps here on my layer mask. Make sure you are clicked on the layer mask when you're doing this. And you can see now we're revealing more parts of the hair here. And this just gives us a better idea of how much of the hair we have selected in here. And then we can hit X to switch back over to black and just paint out all the excess that we don't want selected. So we're just trying to select the hair. So I can paint out the complexion here, the skin, and the ears. Alright, so that's not perfect, but it's good enough for the purposes of this tutorial. So I'll go ahead and unhide my main layer here. And with my paintbrush tool still selected, I'm just going to change the color here to a red color. And I'll just do a bright red. And I'm going to make sure I'm clicked on my actual layer now and not my layer mask. And I can increase the size of my brush. You'll see when I paint now on this layer, it's only showing up on the hair because we've masked everything else out. And that's going to come in handy for our next feature, which I'm going to go into a little bit more depth in a second. But for now, I'm going to switch back over to GIMP, and I'm just going to show you guys the same thing. So I'll come over here to our image of the girl with the blue hair. And in GIMP, the quick mask is this little icon here. It almost looks like the marching ants icon that's used for the selection areas. But you can see that it also gives you the shortcut key, which is Shift Q, to toggle this mask on and off. The difference with GIMP and Photoshop is that GIMP just automatically puts the red over the entire image when the quick mask is on. And if I grab my paintbrush tool and just reset my colors here to black and white, I can go ahead and switch over to white and again decrease the size of my brush with the bracket keys, and I can go ahead and paint over the hair here. And you can see the hair becomes revealed under the quick mask, so all the parts that are red are painted away just like they are in Photoshop. And this isn't perfect just like before, but if I hit Shift Q again, it'll toggle my quick mask off. And you can see there's a selection area here, just like in Photoshop. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate my main layer, and I'm just going to name this hair color as well. And then I can right click and go to Add Layer Mask, and then under Initialize Layer Mask 2, I'll just choose Selection, and I'll go ahead and click Add. And if I hide my main layer, now you'll see the hair is masked out here, and it's singled out, and I can hit Select None now. And just like in Photoshop, I can paint on this layer mask to clean this up a little bit. So I'll grab my black color here, and using my paintbrush, I'll just paint out any excess parts here, like the skin or any of the background here that I don't want in here. And I'll go ahead and unhide that main layer and click on the layer here off of the layer mask. With my paintbrush tool still selected, I'll just choose a bright red like I did over in Photoshop and increase the size of my brush. And if I paint directly on this image now, you'll see that only the parts with the hair are being painted over. And so we get pretty much the same result. So I'll leave this here for now, and it's going to play into our next feature. So I'll come back to Photoshop. So in both Photoshop and GIMP, you can have layer modes, and that allows you to sort of blend layers together and create some cool effects. So for example, if I'm clicked here on this layer that we painted red, and we've got the layer mask on here, I can come up here and change the layer mode. And in this case, I'll change it to color. And now what that does is it recolors the hair of our subject to red. So now it looks like she's got some red hair. And of course, we could always fix this up if we wanted to. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to leave it as is. But you'll see it gives our model this cool red hair. And I can also come over here if I wanted to, decrease the intensity of this. I could just decrease the opacity of this layer, and that'll decrease some of the red in here. And there's a ton of other layer modes in here. So you've got overlay is one, soft light's a pretty popular one. You've got exclusion. And then similar to color, you've got hue, and so that'll also change this to red, and that actually looks a little bit more realistic there. And then you've got saturation and just really a variety of modes you could change this to. So I'm going to keep this set to hue because I think that gave us the best result, the most realistic result. But if I come over to GIMP, I can do the same thing. So I'll click on my layer, and now we've got a variety of layer modes in here, and you can see we've got a ton of layer modes just like in Photoshop. In fact, there might be more layer modes in here. But I could change this to color, and that's going to recolor the hair of our model. Or I can also change this to hue like we did in Photoshop. Looks like this produces a bit of a darker red. I think the reds might have been slightly different that I used, but it does look like the model has red hair in both GIMP and Photoshop. So the sixth feature is a pretty simple one, and that is the ability to drag an image from one composition to another. So I'm going to come over here and let's say I've got this image of a guy throwing a chicken up in the air and I want it to be on the same image as this guy. And so all I have to do is come over here to this image and with my move tool selected, click and drag this image and hover over this tab up here. And that'll bring me over to the photo of the guy and his son with the bicycle. And then I can just drag inside this image. You'll see that the image is highlighted now with white and I've got this little plus sign on my mouse pointer. So if I release my mouse, now this photo has been pasted into this composition as a new layer, and now we can go ahead and do whatever we want with these images. We can blend them together or whatever. We're actually going to do that in the next step. So I'll come over to GIMP and I'm just going to click on this tab here to select the image of the guy throwing the chicken up in the air or the rooster up in the air. And the difference here between Photoshop and GIMP, instead of using the move tool and dragging this image, which just moves the image around on the canvas, I'll hit Control Z. Now I just click and drag this tab over to this one, and if I hover over this tab, it'll bring up my photo, and then I can just hover my mouse over this photo and release, and now that image has been dropped in here as a new layer. And then I could change the name of this to guy throwing rooster, and now this image is in this composition. The next feature found in both Photoshop and GIMP is the ability to add layer group masks. So you guys know about layer masks for individual layers, but what if you want to apply the same layer mask to multiple layers simultaneously? Well, let me just demonstrate with this photo here. So we've gone ahead and dragged and dropped this photo in here, but let's say we want to blend this photo with the photo below. So with my move tool selected, I'm just going to move this photo over to the right a little bit, and then I'm going to unlock this main layer here, and I'm going to drag this layer 1 below the layer 0. And now I'm going to select the layer 0 and move this over to the left a little bit. And I want this image to blend into this image so that I can see the action going on in both photos. So what I'll do is I'll add a layer mask to this layer 0. So here we have our layer mask now. I can grab my gradient tool and I'm going to just choose black as the color. And black is going to make our layer mask transparent wherever we paint it. And so I've got the color over here set to foreground to transparent. And then I'm going to go ahead and change the shape to linear. And then I'm going to make sure that my reverse is checked here, and that's just reversing the direction of this gradient. And now I'm going to click and drag this and hold shift while I drag to put this in straight line mode. And I'll hit Control Z. I actually want to draw it in the opposite direction here. And I'm just going to draw that again. And so now you can see we've got a layer mask here, and it's allowing this image to fade into the image on the right. But this is just a single layer mask on a single layer. So let's say there's something below these layers that we want to reveal, and so we want to basically create a layer mask that will apply to both of these. So let's say, for example, I create a new layer, and let me just grab sort of a lighter gray color. And let's say I'm going to change my gradient to foreground to background here, and just go ahead and draw this gradient. So now we've got this sort of gray to black gradient. And I'm going to drag this below our two layers. Let's say we want this gradient to be revealed behind these layers. So what I can do is create a layer group and move this to the top, and then drag both of these layers into this layer group here, and just make sure that this layer is below the layer 0 layer. And so I'll click on this layer group and go ahead and add a layer mask to this. So this is a white layer mask. And now with my gradient tool selected, I'm just going to change this back to foreground and transparent. And then switch this over to black. Go ahead and check the reverse option again and draw my gradient. And now that's applied that gradient to this layer mask, which is applying the layer mask to the entire group. So it's applying it to both of these layers, and it's revealing that gradient below both of these layers in the background. Well, if I come over to GIMP, I can do the same thing. So I'll grab my move tool and move this guy over to the right, and then click and drag this photo of the guy with the bicycle up top, and then use my move tool to drag it over to the left. And now I'll right click and go to add layer mask and set this to white full opacity and click add. And then I'm going to grab my gradient tool, change the color here to black, and then change this to foreground to transparent. And then I'm going to hold the control key and drag this, which is going to drag it in straight line mode. So actually the cool thing about GIMP is you can live edit this gradient, so I can actually make changes to this in real time. So I'll change the shape to linear, and I can also reverse the colors if I want to. And I can even change the starting and ending endpoints here. so I could change the location of the gradient. And then just go ahead and hit enter to apply that. So now these photos are blending into one another. And I'll go ahead and create a new layer, and we'll name this gradient. And I'll change this color to that gray color we used in the other image. Make sure this is black. And then I'll change this to foreground to background RGB. And then change this to radial. And go ahead and draw this gradient. And we can also adjust the way the gradient fades in real time on here. So I can adjust this right here and hit enter. And then I'll drag this below the two layers here. So now again, I want to apply a layer mask to both of these layers. So I'll go ahead and create a layer group, move it to the top, and move both of these layers into that layer group, and then drag this below. And now I can come over here, right click, and go to Add Layer Mask. And under Initialize Layer Mask 2, select White and click Add. And with my gradient tool selected, I'll change this back to foreground and transparent, and go ahead and draw this gradient. And again, I can live edit this gradient and just hit enter when I'm done. So there we go, we've got the same effect in GIMP and Photoshop. So for the next feature, I'm going to come back over here to this chicken image, and I'll grab my zoom tool and just zoom in here. So the 8th feature found in both of these programs is the healing tool. So in Photoshop, it's called the healing brush, and I can click on it here or hit J. And I'm just gonna loosely try to get rid of this chicken here. So what this tool is doing is it's using an algorithm to grab an area of pixels and use those pixels to paint over an object in an image. So if I hold Alt, I can choose the area I want the algorithm to choose from. So I want something similar to the background behind this chicken, or what I assume is behind this chicken. So I'll hold Alt and just click right here. And now if I come over to our chicken, basically the algorithm is going to use a combination of what's over here in the background and what's on this chicken right here, or basically the pixels from the chicken, to create a new area. So I'm just going to go ahead and paint over this. And this isn't going to be perfect, and just for the sake of time, I'm not going to, again, spend too much time trying to blend this. But you can see the heal tool has done a pretty good job here in Photoshop of erasing the chicken here. And I could hold Alt and choose another area and just sort of paint over this again. And I can just continue to choose new areas. But for the most part, our chicken has been erased using the heal tool. Well, if I come over to GIMP now and come over to this chicken image, grab my zoom tool, zoom in on the chicken, I'm going to grab what's called the heal tool in GIMP. You can also hit H on your keyboard. And I'll just decrease the size of my brush here. And this is essentially the same as the healing brush in Photoshop. It uses an area of pixels that you select to then paint over another area and try to basically pull pixels from that area you're painting on to create a nice blended result. And the goal of this is essentially to be able to erase objects and images. So in GIMP, I hold Control instead of Alt, and I click on an area, and then I can go ahead and click on this chicken here. And just like in Photoshop, this is using the surrounding pixels to go ahead and erase this chicken here. And now that chicken is pretty much erased. I'll grab my zoom tool, hold Control, and zoom out. And I didn't really spend too much time in either program trying to blend this and make it look more realistic. But here's the GIMP version, and then here's the Photoshop version, so we have pretty comparable results there. The next Photoshop feature that's also found in GIMP is what's called the bird's eye view feature in Photoshop. So if I hold H, it's going to bring up my hand tool in Photoshop, and then if I click and move around, you'll see there's a little box here, and I can choose what part of the image I want to be zoomed in on. So if I release my mouse over this guy, it'll come over here to this guy, and I'm now zoomed in on him. If I hold H again and drag my mouse around, I can do the same thing. I can come back to that chicken, or I can come over here. But basically, I can come to any part of my image using this bird's eye view. If I come over to GIMP, I have the same thing. It's set up a little bit differently. So if I come down here, there's like a move tool icon in the bottom corner. Well, if I click and hold that, you'll see we have a little bird's eye view thumbnail that shows up right here. And you can see our whole image on here, and then it's got a highlighted square or rectangle shape. And I can move that rectangle around, and it just allows me to really focus on any part of the image here. And when I release, I'll then be zoomed in on that part. And I can zoom in a little bit closer if I want. grab this again, and same thing, I can just move around my image and basically do the same thing I can do with the bird's eye view tool in Photoshop and just navigate around my image and determine what part of my image I want to be zoomed in on. So the 10th and final feature that I'm going to highlight in this tutorial that can be found in both Photoshop and GIMP is the search feature. Now I think this is a very useful tool for both programs. In Photoshop it can be accessed by holding Control F, and that'll bring up the search feature here, and then if you click on the search bar you can now type in whatever you want. So let's say you want to find a tool like the eraser tool. All you got to do is type in the name of the tool and it'll give you basically a list of tools that apply here. And you could do the same with filters. So let's say I want to find the Gaussian blur. I can just go ahead and type in Gaussian and you'll see it'll pop up here in the results. And when I go ahead and click on it, it'll bring up my Gaussian blur tool or my Gaussian blur filter. And now I can do whatever effects that I want to on my active layer here. Go ahead and click OK. And now that Gaussian blur is applied. So hit Control Z. So go ahead and hit Control F to bring up that search again. I can also use this to find images that are open in Photoshop. So let's say I want to open up that photo we used at the beginning of the tutorial of the guy paddling near the horizon. So I'll go ahead and type in paddle, and now I can see I have an image called paddle here, and I'll click on that and that'll bring us to that image right there. So if I switch back over to GIMP, I can also use the search feature on here. Instead of holding Control F, I actually just hit the / key on my keyboard. And let's say again I want to search for a tool, maybe the Unified Transform tool. I can just type Unified and it'll bring it up here. I don't have to finish typing the name just like in Photoshop. I can also search for features. So let's say I want to find the Gaussian blur feature. I can just type that in and that'll show up here. It'll also show other filters or features that also contain the word Gaussian. And also if I want to search for an image, I can type in the name of the image, and just like in Photoshop, it'll show the image in here. And if I double click on it, it'll go ahead and take me to that image. Alright, so that's it for this tutorial. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and hopefully I also opened up your eyes to a lot of the similarities between GIMP and Photoshop. If you like this tutorial, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/daviesmediadesign. You can also visit our website at daviesmediadesign.com, and you can enroll in our GIMP photo editing course from beginner to pro photo retoucher, and I'll include a link to that as well as all the relevant links from this tutorial in the description. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.